Back in the day, long before Columbus ever thought about sailing west, Spain wasn't even one country. It was a bunch of different kingdoms. You had Castile, Aragon, Navarre, and others. Each one of them wanted to show they were the big boss. And one of the best ways to do that was to mint your own coins. Silver was the metal of choice. It was valuable, durable, and everyone knew what it was worth. These early coins, like the Castilian real, started popping up around the 14th century. They weren't super fancy, but they did the job. They had a picture of the king or a coat of arms, something to say, "This is our money, and it's good." These first silver coins were pretty simple. They were often hand-struck, which means a guy literally took a hammer and slammed a die onto a piece of silver. Because of this, no two coins were exactly alike. Some would be off-center, some would be thicker on one side, and the weight could vary a little bit. It's what we call a crude minting process. But for the people using them, it was a huge step up from just trading goods. You could carry your wealth in your pocket. These coins helped build the economies of these early Spanish kingdoms, funding armies and building castles. They were the foundation for everything that came later. The designs on these early coins were all about power and religion. You'd almost always see a cross somewhere on the coin. That was a big deal back then. It showed that the kingdom was Christian and had the backing of the church. The other side would usually have the monarch's bust or their royal seal. It was like a business card for the king. It told everyone who was in charge and that this coin was backed by their authority. The lettering was usually in Latin, the official language of the time, spelling out the king's name and titles. It was all about making a statement. As these kingdoms started to come together, eventually forming the Spain we know today, their money started to get more standardized. When Ferdinand and Isabella, the famous Catholic monarchs, united Castile and Aragon, they knew they needed a single, reliable currency to unite their new kingdom. This led to a big reform of the coinage system at the end of the 15th century. They created the real as the standard silver unit, a coin that would become the basis for a global currency. This was the moment Spanish silver went from being a local player to getting ready for the world stage. They had no idea just how big it was about to get. Then came 1492. Columbus sails the ocean blue, and everything changes. Suddenly, Spain isn't just a European power, it's on its way to becoming the first global empire. And what does an empire need to run? Money. Lots and lots of money. When the Spanish conquistadors, guys like Hernán Cortés and Francisco Pizarro, got to the Americas, they found what they were looking for: incredible amounts of gold and silver. The Aztec and Inca empires had treasures beyond their wildest dreams. This wasn't just a little bit of silver, it was mountains of it. This discovery would fuel the Spanish Empire for the next 300 years. With all this new metal pouring in, Spain became the richest and most powerful nation on earth. The Spanish crown took its share, the royal fifth, which was 20% of all precious metals mined in the colonies. This funded their massive armies and navies, allowing them to fight wars all over Europe and expand their empire. The sheer amount of silver flowing into Spain was staggering. It actually caused massive inflation across Europe, something they called the price revolution. Suddenly, there was so much money floating around that prices for everyday goods went through the roof. It was a lesson in economics nobody saw coming. This new wealth completely transformed Spain. Palaces were built, art flourished, and the Spanish Golden Age began. But it all rested on the silver coming from the New World. The entire global economy started to revolve around Spain and its silver coins. These coins weren't just used in Europe, they were being shipped to Asia to trade for spices, silk, and porcelain. The Spanish silver coin became the first truly global currency. You could spend it in Madrid, Mexico City, Manila, or Beijing. It connected the world in a way nothing had before. It was the dollar of its day. Of course, getting all that silver from the mines in the Americas back to Spain was a huge challenge. It had to be mined, refined, minted into coins, and then loaded onto ships for the dangerous journey across the Atlantic. These treasure fleets were massive convoys of ships protected by warships called galleons. But even with protection, they were a tempting target for pirates and privateers from rival countries like England and France. The story of the Spanish Empire is also the story of the struggle to control and protect this river of silver that flowed across the ocean. You can't have a global currency without places to make it. When the Spanish found a literal mountain of silver in Potosi, in modern-day Bolivia, they knew they hit the jackpot. In 1545, they found this place, and it quickly became the largest source of silver in the world. The city of Potosi sprung up around the mountain, becoming one of the largest and wealthiest cities in the world at the time. To handle all this silver, Spain established a massive mint right there in Potosi in 1572. This mint, along with others in Mexico City and Lima, became the engine rooms of the Spanish Empire's economy. The conditions in these mines were brutal. The Spanish used a forced labor system, forcing indigenous people to work in the dangerous and dark tunnels of the mountain. It was a dark side to all this wealth. The silver ore they dug out had to be refined. They used a new mercury amalgamation process, which was effective but also highly toxic. After refining, the pure silver was brought to the mint. There it was melted down and turned into long bars. These bars were then cut into chunks, weighed, and hammered into coins. It was a massive industrial operation, all happening thousands of feet up in the Andes Mountains. The coins made at these colonial mints are known as cob coins. The name comes from the Spanish phrase cabo de barra, meaning end of the bar. They would literally chop a piece off the end of a silver bar, make sure it was the right weight, and then strike it with a hammer. This is why cobs are so irregular in shape. They weren't trying to make a perfect circle. They were just trying to make a piece of silver with the right weight and the official stamp. The mint mark, like a P for Potosi, was crucial. It told you where the coin was made and guaranteed its silver content. These mints produced millions upon millions of coins every year. The Mexico City Mint was the first one in the Americas, established way back in 1535. It became a powerhouse, producing high-quality silver coins that were respected all over the world. Lima, in Peru, was another major mint. Each mint had its own unique story and slightly different style, which is something collectors get really excited about today. You can look at a coin and, if you know what you're looking for, tell its entire life story, where it was born, who was king at the time, and the journey it took. These mints weren't just factories. They were the heart of the Spanish colonial system. Let's talk about the coins themselves. The basic unit was the real. It was a solid silver coin, a good day's wage for a laborer. But the real rock star of Spanish currency was the big one, the 8 reals coin. This was the famous piece of 8. It was a huge, heavy silver coin, about the size of a silver dollar. It contained about an ounce of pure silver, and its value was recognized everywhere. When people talked about Spanish treasure, this is the coin they were dreaming of. It was the largest silver coin in regular circulation in the world for centuries, and it set the standard for international trade. The piece of 8 got its name because it was worth 8 of the smaller real coins. People would literally make change by cutting the coin into pieces. If you cut it in half, you had 2 pieces worth 4 reales each. If you cut it into quarters, each piece was worth 2 reales. That's where the term 2 bits for a quarter comes from. It was a practical system. The coin was designed to be divisible. This is why you sometimes find pieces of these coins on shipwrecks or in archaeological digs. It was common practice. This coin was the workhorse of global commerce. Then you have the cob coins, which we talked about. These were the early, crudely made coins from the mints in Potosi, Mexico City, and Lima. They are often misshapen, with parts of the design missing, but what they lacked in beauty, they made up for in value. The silver was pure, and the weight was right, and that's what mattered to a merchant. Holding a cob coin is like holding a raw piece of history. You can feel the hammer strikes and imagine it being loaded onto a galleon for its dangerous trip across the Atlantic. These are the coins that pirates like Blackbeard were after. Later on, in 1732, Spain upgraded its technology. They started using screw presses to make coins. This produced a much better looking coin, perfectly round with a detailed design and a protective edge. These are called milled or portrait dollars. They had a portrait of the Spanish king on one side. On the other, they had the Spanish coat of arms between 2 pillars, representing the Pillars of Hercules at the Strait of Gibraltar. A banner was wrapped around the pillars with the motto Plus Ultra, meaning more beyond. This powerful imagery symbolized Spain's global empire. These were the coins that became the model for the United States silver dollar. You might think the story of Spanish silver is just about Spain and its colonies, but its influence spread everywhere, especially to a new little country called the United States. Before the United States had its own official money, what do you think people were using? That's right, Spanish silver. The piece of 8 was the most common and trusted coin in the American colonies. When the colonists were complaining about taxation without representation, they were paying those taxes with Spanish coins. It was the de facto currency of early America. When the United States finally won its independence, it had a big problem: what to use for money. The new government needed to create its own currency system. So, what did they base it on? They based it on the coin everyone was already using and trusted, the Spanish 8 reales. The Coinage Act of 1792 established the United States dollar, and its weight and silver content were based directly on the Spanish milled dollar. The word dollar itself even comes from a German silver coin called a thaler, but it was the Spanish coin that everyone called a dollar in the Americas. For decades, even after the United States Mint started making its own coins, Spanish silver remained legal tender in the United States. It was so common and so trusted that the government didn't officially remove it from circulation until 1857. Think about that. For over 80 years of American history, you could walk into a store and pay with a Spanish coin. This is why you find so many old Spanish coins buried in fields and found in old houses all along the east coast of the United States. They were a part of everyday life for generations of Americans. Even the symbol for the United States dollar, the dollar sign, likely comes from the Spanish piece of 8. One popular theory is that it's a shorthand version of the 2 pillars and the banner from the back of the coin. Another theory is that it evolved from an abbreviation for pesos. Either way, the connection is clear. The most powerful currency symbol in the world today has its roots in a Spanish silver coin from the 1700s. The DNA of the American dollar is Spanish, through and through. It's a piece of history that most people walk around with in their pocket and have no idea. The Spanish piece of 8 wasn't just money, it was the engine of global trade for 300 years. Imagine, just for a second, a merchant in the Philippines. He wants to buy silk from a trader in China. So, what currency do they use? Well, the Chinese merchant doesn't want English pounds or French francs. He wants Spanish silver. It was the only currency that was accepted without question from Manila to Amsterdam to Boston. The Spanish established a famous trade route, the Manila Galleon Route, where they would ship silver from Mexico to the Philippines, then use that silver to buy Asian goods to sell back in Europe and the Americas. This global demand for Spanish silver made the treasure fleets incredibly valuable. A single fleet could be carrying a fortune that would be worth billions of dollars today. And, you know, where there's that much treasure, there are going to be people who want to steal it. This was the golden age of piracy. Pirates of the Caribbean wasn't just a movie, it was a real thing. Guys like Henry Morgan, Francis Drake, who was more of a privateer working for England, and the famous Blackbeard made their living by attacking Spanish ships and coastal towns, all to get their hands on that silver. The Spanish built massive forts in key ports like Havana, Cartagena, and San Juan to protect their treasure. They armed their galleons with dozens of cannons. But the ocean is a big place, and the fleets were still vulnerable. A successful pirate raid could make a man rich for life. But it wasn't just pirates. Rival nations like England, Holland, and France were constantly at war with Spain. They would hire privateers, who were basically government-licensed pirates, to attack Spanish shipping. It was a way to wage economic warfare and fill their own treasuries at Spain's expense. Hurricanes were an even bigger threat than pirates. The fleets had to sail through the Caribbean during hurricane season. Many a Spanish galleon, loaded to the brim with silver coins, was sent to the bottom of the ocean by a massive storm. These shipwrecks are the source of some of the greatest treasure discoveries in history. A storm could do more damage in one night than a whole fleet of pirates. The story of Spanish silver is a story of immense wealth, but also of incredible risk, danger, and adventure on the high seas. It's the stuff of legends. Whenever you have something as valuable and widely used as the piece of 8, you're going to have people trying to make fakes. Counterfeiting was a huge problem. Some fakes were crude, made from base metals like pewter or copper, and then plated with a thin layer of silver. An experienced merchant could usually spot these by their weight, the way they sounded when dropped, or just by looking at the poor quality of the design. But a good counterfeit could fool a lot of people and undermine trust in the currency. Getting caught was a serious crime. The punishment was often death. There were also more clever ways to cheat the system. One common practice was clipping. People would shave off tiny bits of silver from the edge of a coin. One clipped coin wouldn't be much, but if you clipped hundreds of them, you could accumulate a nice little pile of silver. This is why the Spanish introduced milled coins with a patterned edge in 1732. The complex design on the edge made it instantly obvious if the coin had been clipped. It was a major security feature, kind of like the ridges on a modern quarter, and it greatly increased the coin's integrity. Designs also changed over time, usually when a new king came to the throne. The coins were a form of propaganda, so a new monarch wanted his face on the money as soon as possible. For collectors, these changes are fantastic. They allow us to date the coins very precisely. You can see the progression from the simple cross and shield of the early Habsburg kings to the detailed, bewigged portraits of the Bourbon kings in the 18th century. Each design tells a story about the art, politics, and technology of its time. The coins are like a timeline of the Spanish Empire. Eventually, the Spanish Empire began to crumble. In the early 19th century, its colonies in the Americas fought for and won their independence. New nations like Mexico, Peru, and Bolivia were born. And what's one of the first things a new nation does? It issues its own currency. These new republics took over the old Spanish mints and began striking their own coins. Often they kept the 8 real standard, but they replaced the portrait of the Spanish king with their own new national symbols, like the eagle and snake on Mexican coins. This marked the end of the era of Spanish silver's global dominance. For a lot of people, the most exciting part about Spanish silver is the treasure. Hundreds of Spanish galleons sank over the centuries, their holds filled with silver coins. For a long time, these wrecks were lost to time, buried under sand and coral at the bottom of the ocean. But with the invention of scuba gear and modern salvage technology, treasure hunters began searching for them. In 1985, a treasure hunter named Mel Fisher found the wreck of the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, a Spanish galleon that sank in a hurricane off the coast of Florida in 1622. The Atocha was one of the most incredible treasure finds in history. After searching for 16 years, Fisher and his crew found the motherlode, over 40 tons of silver and gold. This included hundreds of thousands of silver coins, mostly crude cobs from the Potosi Mint. The discovery was a worldwide sensation. It brought the story of Spanish treasure fleets to life for millions of people. Each coin recovered from the wreck was a time capsule, perfectly preserved by the sea for over 360 years. The find made Mel Fisher a legend and kicked off a new golden age of shipwreck exploration. Discoveries like the Atocha have made Spanish colonial coins incredibly popular with collectors. You can own a real piece of treasure, a coin that was on a Spanish galleon and might have been touched by pirates. Cobs from famous shipwrecks are especially desirable. They often come with a certificate of authenticity that tells the story of the wreck they came from. Even common non-shipwreck coins are popular. You can buy a nice Spanish milled dollar from the 1700s, the same type of coin used by the American founding fathers, for a reasonable price. It's a tangible link to a fascinating period of history. Collecting Spanish silver is a huge field. You can specialize in so many different areas. Some people collect cobs from a specific mint, like Potosi or Lima. Others try to get a coin from the reign of every Spanish king. Some focus on shipwreck coins. Others are interested in the coins used in specific places, like the ones counterstamped for use in Asia or the Caribbean. The fun is in the research and the hunt. Every coin has a story, and learning to read the mint marks, assayer's initials, and dates is part of the challenge. It's a hobby that combines history, adventure, and economics all in one. When you look back at the history, it's hard to overstate the importance of Spanish silver coins. They weren't just pieces of metal, they were the foundation of the first truly global economy. For 300 years, the piece of 8 was the most trusted and recognized currency on the planet. It connected continents, funded empires, and changed the course of world history. It fueled the rise of Spain, caused inflation across Europe, and financed trade with Asia. Without the silver from Potosi and Mexico, the world would look very different today. The legacy of these coins is still with us, even if we don't always see it. As we've discussed, the United States dollar, the dominant currency in the world today, is a direct descendant of the Spanish piece of 8. Its size, its value, and even its name and symbol all have roots in Spanish colonial currency. When you look at the stock market reports on Wall Street, you're looking at a system that traces its lineage back to the trade and finance made possible by these silver coins. It's a powerful and often overlooked connection to the past. The story of Spanish silver is also a story of human ambition, discovery, conflict, and innovation. It involves conquistadors and kings, miners and merchants, pirates and treasure hunters. It's a story of incredible wealth and terrible exploitation. The coins themselves are artifacts of this story. A simple silver cob represents the forced labor in the mines of Bolivia, the dangerous voyage across the Atlantic, the threat of pirate attack, and the complex web of global trade. Holding one in your hand is like holding a piece of that epic journey. Today, Spanish silver coins continue to fascinate us. They appear in movies, books, and museums. They are sought after by collectors who cherish them as links to a bygone era of adventure and empire. Whether it's a crude cob from a famous shipwreck or a beautifully preserved portrait dollar, each coin is a miniature historical document. They remind us of a time when the world was being connected for the first time, and a single type of silver coin, minted in the mountains of the New World, was the currency that made it all possible. And that's a story worth more than its weight in silver.